David Haye versus Mark the Mori have done a sort of face-off, gloves are off type program. It's only 10 minutes long and it's on the Lad Bible YouTube channel. To repeat, it is on the Lad Bible YouTube channel. I would recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it already. It was uploaded relatively recently, and when I watched it, it only had something like 300 views on it. So, I'm imagining a lot of people haven't seen it yet. First and foremost, where did this animosity come from? If I didn't know better, I would assume this is David Haye trying to promote and sell the fight. The sort of animosity between these two, refusing to shake hands at the end, David Haye cutting across Mark the Mori. I don't understand where these guys have suddenly come to hate each other from. It's got to be one of these false rivalries, hasn't it? That's put on for the sake of an event, because I doubt David Haye had even heard of Mark the Mori a couple of months ago, let alone having some sort of deep rivalry with him. Now, I thought both guys made some interesting points during the course of the fight, but bizarrely, it came as one of the most bizarre moments of any of these programs that I've ever seen. But halfway through, Mark the Mori said, I've actually got a gift for you, David, to help you get to the ring. And I've got a gift for you to help you out on fight night. And I assumed it would be some joke as to his shoulder injury. I assumed it would be some joke as to his toe injury. I was expecting it to be a pack of blister plasters or a sling or something like that. And bizarrely, Mark the Mori reached into the pocket of his jeans and took out a bit of lamb, like as in a sort of steak, and put it on the desk. I think this was some reference to the fact that Mark the Mori is obviously a bodybuilder type, whereas David Haye is a vegan. But I think he was suggesting that the lamb and the meat would sort of help David Haye in his comeback and help him stay free from injury. But it was one of the most bizarre moments I've seen on any of these programs. Mark the Mori seems like a very serious, somber, quiet character. Not the biggest joker out there, let's put it that way. And he produces a lamb steak, totally out of the blue. Which was pretty bizarre. I actually like Mark the Mori. I've grown to like him more and more in these interviews. He's not the most, extrovert, charismatic type guy, but he has quite an attractive realism to him. He knows he hasn't fought anyone. He knows he probably isn't one of the top ranked boxers in the world. But a point he makes, and he makes it quite well, is that now is the good time to catch David Haye. He keeps saying the old haymaker. He keeps referring to the injuries. And maybe he knows that David Haye of a few years ago would be too much for him, but he's calculated the risk, and he's worked out that if there is a time to catch David Haye, it's now. And he makes that point very well about how David Haye is old, how David Haye is injured, and how he could be able to exploit that. And I think that's he's quite realistic, Mark the Mori, and I like that about him. I do. I also get the impression that he's someone who is genuinely coming to fight. He said that he's not going to run. He says that he's going to be in there throwing punches. I think he knows that him losing is a realistic possibility, and I think he's accepted that. But he's coming out with pretty bold statements about how he's prepared to die in the ring, and how he's going to be coming to take David Haye's head off. And I do think that this is going to be a fight where Mark the Mori is there to fight, there to be hit, there to throw punches. Because let's face it, he's not got the best footwork in the world, and if it does turn into a running match, David Haye is probably going to soundly beat him in that department. Even after 3.5 years out of the ring. So, I like that about Mark the Mori. As for David Haye, he was being fairly confrontational. He was cutting across Mark the Mori. He was saying that Mark the Mori wouldn't be able to deal with his level, and from the very first punch, Mark the Mori was gonna know that he was in trouble and that sort of thing. it's classic David Haye, really, of trying to build a fight and trying to move things in that direction. I thought one point David Haye did make, and this is something that I've actually kind of agree with him at, is he says a lot of guys who are shorter heavyweights like Derek Chisora, Ruiz, have the same tactics as how to beat him. They want to come in, get low, fight on the inside, try and hit him to the body. That classic sort of technique of David Haye, and he says that a lot of guys talk like that and it never works. And I actually think that's a fair point. I've always thought, actually, that David Haye was at his most devastating against the shorter opponents. For me, and this is one of the reasons that I always fancied Tyson Fury to beat him, I think David Haye is not so good at, against taller opponents. When we saw him fight Valiev, when we saw him fight Klitschko, those were both extremely nervous performances from David Haye. Dancing around on the outside, very, very cautious, defensively minded performances. He's not someone who wants to eat a jab all night, which is fair enough, but it turns him, that height dynamic and that range dynamic turns him into a low output, cautious, defensive fighter, to my money. Whereas when he comes up against the shorter fighters, I remember the Derek Chisora fight, I was at that fight myself. He comes out of the traps a lot faster. He's a lot more high volume. He tries to push the pace a bit more, whereas he's more of a counter-puncher, ambusher when he is against a taller opponent. So I've noticed that myself, is that for me, I think he does make a fair point, and he is better against the shorter, stockier opponents. And I do think Haye will come out fast in the first round. I think the Mori will have to weather a storm, and I don't think the Mori is going to be able to move or to run, so he really is going to have to weather a storm, and I think the first round or two will be difficult. For him. But I think they both made sensible points there. These are two guys who are, they seem to have some intelligence, certainly. I think David Haye's right about the styles. I also think Mark the Mori's right about the levels in boxing, and the fact that now could well be the best time to catch David Haye. I mean, it may mean that, even if David Haye's still 60% David Haye, he may still have enough to win. And, the fact that this is the right time to catch him, it may not be that Mark the Mori is going to be able to expose that. But, you do have to have these doubts when a guy's been out of the ring for so long. And you do have to have the doubts with someone like David Haye, whose style doesn't age overly well. I think I kind of, the classic example I look at here is Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins. When they fought first time round, Roy Jones Jr. won with quite a bit in hand, as we know. Later on, when they rematched towards the end of their careers, Bernard Hopkins won with a bit in hand. And for me, it's because of how different they are as fighters and how the styles aged. Roy Jones Jr., there's a lot of similarities between Roy Jones Jr. and David Haye. I mean, don't get me wrong, Roy Jones Jr. was the better fighter, but we're talking about two guys reliant on speed, explosiveness, and reflexes, really real reflexes. If you actually look back at that David Haye-Klitschko fight, one of the impressive things about David Haye is his head movement, how hard he actually is to tag in there. He's an elusive, slippery fighter. And for Roy Jones, we saw his career come to a close at the top level a long time before Bernard Hopkins, because, once those reflexes start to dip, it was game over for Roy. Whereas with Bernard Hopkins, more of a technician, more of a chess player, his style aged very well. He wasn't so reliant on raw athleticism. He wasn't so reliant on speed and reflexes. His game didn't go when he turned to his late 30s. And that's my concern with David Haye. I know he's been sparring, I know he's been training hard, but it's different in a pro ring. And 3.5 years, that's a long enough period of time to see a substantial ebbing away of reflexes, ebbing away of speed, ebbing away of explosiveness. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure David Haye's still going to have power in there, but for me, David Haye didn't generate his power by raw size. He wasn't like he was never like a massive heavyweight. He generated his power by the speed and the explosiveness he was able to generate. And if that starts to go, who knows how it will affect his game. I think it'll be a big change. It's a really interesting fight. David Haye's obviously going to be a substantial favourite, and it would be a huge upset if the Mori was to pull it off. If you want to get into the build-up, watch this on the Lad Bible and let me know your thoughts. Many thanks for watching.